The F-4 Phantom was America's primary fighter when the Soviet T-72 tank first entered service, and the world's steel beasts had not yet discovered a foe in the form of the wire-guided anti-tank missile. The T-72 is the second most popular post-World War II tank, behind only the ubiquitous T-54 and T-55, with at least 25,000 built. The T-72's longevity is demonstrated by the fact that it is still in use by approximately 45 nations, including Russia. The T-72 was initially developed as a less expensive alternative to the disastrous T-64, a sophisticated tank from the middle of the 1960s that was overly complicated and unreliable. The 41-ton T-72 had a 125mm smoothbore cannon and was first used by the Soviet Army in 1973. The original T-72 had adequate armor protection for a tank of the early 1970s thanks to its rolled homogeneous armor, which is a measurement of armor toughness between 410 and 500 millimeters for the cast armor hull and turret. However, it also carried ammunition in the crew compartment rather than a separate, secure space, increasing the likelihood of a catastrophic explosion in the event of a collision. U.S. troops referred to the damaged T-72s in Iraq as jack-in-the-boxes because so many of them destroyed their turrets. A slow start. The first tank with a V-45K engine and 125mm gun was built in 1968 by the Eurovagonzavod, the company that built Russia's tanks. It was called Object 172. Object 172 was re-engineered after comparison testing with the T-64A. However, the Eurovagonzavod was not permitted to begin building the first batch of Object 172M tanks until 1972. When an obscure political decree was issued. After additional changes and testing, the T-72 was at long last acknowledged into administration. Sadly, the transition from T-64 to T-72's production difficulties resulted in only 30 completed tanks in 1973, and ongoing issues caused them to fall far short of the 440 tanks the state mandated in 1974, when they only delivered close to 150 tanks. The T-72 finally entered full-scale production after the factory was overhauled and modernized as a result of these deficiencies. T-72 copy. At UKBM in Nizhny Tagil, production of the first batch of T-72 Object 172M began in July. However, only 30 completed tanks were delivered in 1973 due to difficulties organizing the factory for the T-72 production shift. In 1974, problems persisted, and out of a state production quota of 440 tanks, only 220 were officially declared, with close to 150 completed tanks. Consequently, significant investments in tooling were made. The factory could only begin full-scale production of the T-72 after modernization. During the 1980s, Yugoslavia sold hundreds of the more advanced M84, which was developed from the T-72. The Iraqis referred to their copies of the T-72 as the Lion of Babylon, to circumvent the UN-imposed arms embargo. These Iraqi tanks were built from kits that the Soviet Union provided to them. The Polish PT-91 Twardy is just one of the more recent derivatives. Also available for older T-72s are modernization packages from Russia and Ukraine. The specifications for the T-72's armor have changed significantly over the years, as have the various T-72 variants that have been in production for decades. By early 1970s standards, the original T-72 tanks were moderately well protected due to their uniform cast steel armor and incorporation of spaced armor technology. The Soviets began producing the T-72 modification in 1979, which featured composite armor in the turret's front and hull's front. Similar to the T-64 composite armor, reactive armor tiles were added to Soviet T-72 tanks at the end of the 1980s. Armament. The tank is fitted with a 125mm D81 smoothbore gun, a 7.62mm coaxial machine gun, and a 12.7mm air defense machine gun mounted on the commander's cupola. The T-72S carries 45 rounds of 125mm ammunition, 22 rounds of which are carried on an automatic loading carousel. The gun fires separate loading armor-piercing discarding sabot rounds, APDS, high-explosive anti-tank, heat, rounds and high-explosive fragmentation, HEFRAG, projectiles. Fire accuracy is attained by a laser rangefinder sight, ballistic computer, and a thermal barrel sleeve. Dual-axis stabilization ensures effective firing on the move. The tank's anti-armor missile system is the 9K-120 SVR, designed by the KBP Instrument Design Bureau, Tula. The system is intended to engage tanks fitted with ERA as well as low-flying air targets. It has a range of 100 m to 4000 m and firing requires the tank to be stationary. The system's 9M119 missile has semi-automatic laser beam riding guidance. The gun's automatic loader will feed both ordnance and missiles. Characteristics. At 41 tons, the T-72 is extremely light and small in comparison to Western main battle tanks and countries that were formerly members of the Warsaw Pact. Some of the roads and bridges were constructed so that T-72s could travel in groups, but NATO tanks were unable to pass at all or just one at a time, significantly reducing their mobility. A nuclear, biological, and chemical (NBC) safety system is included in the T-72. A synthetic fabric made of boron compound is used to line the inside of the hull and turret to reduce the penetration radiation from neutron bomb explosions. The design of the T-72, like that of all Soviet-era tanks, sacrifices interior space in exchange for a very small silhouette and effective armor use, to the point where the fourth crewman is replaced by a mechanical loader. Cruise height is limited by the tank's low height. The Soviet Union set a height limit of 5 feet 4 inches for the T-72. Cope cages. Throughout the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the T-72 saw extensive use by both sides. Some commentators refer to the improvised steel grills that Russian forces used to cover the top of the turret before the invasion as cope cages. Military analysts have speculated that such grills were added to prevent Ukrainian forces from using top attack weapons like the British-Swedish NLAW and the US-made FGM-148 Javelin. The tank is made to weigh more, have a higher visual profile, and make it harder for the crew to get out of the tank. As a response to lessons learned from the 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh War, analysts have also speculated that they could be used as a countermeasure against loitering munitions, RPG-7s fired from above during urban combat, and drone attacks. The fact that the various makeshift cage variations made from various iron fences and meshes lack uniformity suggests that they were largely improvised by the tank crews and are not standard equipment. Some Russian tankers said in May 2022 that they would eventually remove the cages because they made it difficult to use machine guns and radios and made it impossible to get out of a burning tank.